Welcome to the Charlie Paparelli Show. I'm Charlie Paparelli. If you are interested in receiving these entrepreneur interviews, I publish them every Friday. And so not to miss one and to be alerted, if you would just go to paparelli.com and you would just submit your email, you'll not miss one. I am a 25-year angel investor here in the Atlanta technology community. And during that time, I have learned from hundreds of entrepreneurs how to start companies and how to grow them into high impact and valuable organizations. And that's what was the beginnings, the genesis really of this show, is to just interview great entrepreneurs, get their stories out there, have you listen to them, and learn what you can from their stories, their experience, and the wisdom that they've garnered from those experiences. Today's topic is the purpose-driven social entrepreneur. And my special guest is Karim Abouelnaga. He is the CEO and founder of Practice Makes Perfect. Karim is up in New York City. He lives in Queens. We met at the Points of Light Incubator here in the Atlanta area, right behind Georgia Tech on Main Street. And that was quite a few years ago. Although he's not that old. I was thinking it was 10 years ago. That would have meant I met him when he was 18. I don't think that's the case, but he impressed me then in a short conversation that we had after a presentation I gave. And he continued to impress me. And I call him from time to time for his advice and his mentoring, even at his young age. And that is because he thinks about the life he lives. And he asks the question on why this is going on in his life, so that he can then take away these to build principles for himself and for others. He has built a great company and continues to build a great company, and Practice Makes Perfect, as he has dedicated his life thus far to narrowing the education achievement gap for the poor. He wrote his experiences in a book called The Purpose-Driven Social Entrepreneur, and we're going to be talking about this today. But this book is really what he learned in being a social entrepreneur, how he got there, and then how he built this organization. And I think you're going to learn a lot today, and I think you're going to enjoy Karim as I do. Karim, welcome. I'm so glad that you're here.
Thank you, Charlie. I'm excited to be here. Appreciate you having me.
Yeah. Well, the book is really something special. You know, we were talking a little bit before we got started, and you said what you were trying to capture with the book. What was it?
I was trying to speak to folks who were, in essence, like me, but at different ages. So one of the more like formative experiences I had coming out of college was becoming an Echoing Green Fellow. And for those who don't know, Echoing Green invests in these sort of early stage social ventures that are started by folks across an age gamut, and saw that there were people as young as myself who were 17, 18 coming out of college trying to run social enterprises, to people who were as old as 50, 60 in my fellowship class. And I realized that we all had the same thing in common. We were starting organizations that had more than just like a business mindset at their core. And I wanted to, after a few years of running my company, put together a manual or a blueprint, especially for the early days. We exchanged a conversation.
You got it in two sections. It's interesting. There's a personal side to this thing, which really has to speak to the purpose, okay, as a social entrepreneur. And then the second is as you call it, I'd call it too, is the nuts and bolts on how do you do this thing from how do you just get started, you know? So, why did you separate it like that?
Yeah, I mean, I think when you talk to entrepreneurs and you ask them for advice, who are, especially the folks who are 10, 15, 20 years out there, they say, like, give me one bit of advice. Like, what would that be? And they distill it to just never give up, right? Like, never give up. And it's so like abstract. They're like, they've been telling me this my whole life, but really that's what it comes down to. What they're in essence saying is that so much of being an entrepreneur is a mindset. Right? It's being able to handle the highs, it's being able to handle the lows and everything else in the middle. But when you're starting out, you're not thinking about those things, right? You're not thinking about what does it really mean to be an entrepreneur? What is this journey essentially going to look like? What kind of mental capacity or state do I need to be in to be successful? You're instead thinking about the things that are right in front of you,
Yeah,
things that you
right.
think are very tactical,
I call it the "what can kill me today" thing, right?
Yeah. How do I hire someone? How do I fire someone? How do
Right.
I grow my organization? How do I raise money? Like these little tactical things. And then when you start doing those things in the beginning and you get them all wrong, then you realize it's because you didn't take the first step, which is like reflecting on what kind of philosophy or environment you want to build before you hire someone. Who
Yeah.
are the types of people you want to take money from? What are your values, right? And what are you promising? And so I
But it
tried to
is
break
so,
up the
you're a
book.
difficulty though. It is so much on the ground. I mean, you're really running for your life, from the moment that you get started, right? So it's hard to be philosophical. But one thing
Yeah,
you made that comment, you said, never give up, right? Is something that people say, oh, summarize the advice. We'll never give up. But you address in this book something that I just think is really great. And what got my attention, okay, is put yourself in a situation where you don't have a choice of whether you can or cannot give up. That what was so powerful about purpose. Because if it's really your purpose, I just got to do this, Oh, this didn't work. That's okay. This has to work. If this doesn't work, I have to do something. I can't stop. How can I stop?
yeah,
This is what God made me for, right?
yeah. And people often think like purpose is glamorous. Like one day you're gonna wake up and you're gonna realize like, oh, this is what I'm supposed to be doing. The trumpets are gonna start shouting and the sun is just gonna come up. You have Aphrodite coming out of a clam, but it's not like that, right? It comes through deep like reflection, introspection, and you realize this is it. This is what God called me to do. This is the service that I've been put on this
Right.
earth to sort of do. And there are days where you're like, this sucks and I don't want to do this, or this isn't fun.
But I think from the
But you go
beginning,
back
though, it's
to,
also
yeah,
scary because it's so limiting. And it's really scary if I'm 18 years old and decide that's it. I'm 18. Every option is available to me, every option. And you're going to take it down to this to serve these people. And you sit there and you go like, am I doing that is this like my calling for the rest of my life? Is this, that's a scary thought. It's exciting. Oh man, I found it. Oh no, I found it.
no, and you go, and I wrestled with that and I went through it. And the one thing I will say though is at 18, I didn't realize I would say like the magnitude of discovering something like that at such a young age, right? So there was a sense of like idealism and naivete that I would go about it. Like
Right.
everyone is looking for this, and I like found it at such a young age, and I didn't think much of it. I figured everyone was eventually going to find their purpose. Everyone was eventually going to figure it out. I just figured it out a couple of years before some other people did.
Yeah.
It wasn't
Sometimes
until I went.
maybe 50 years before other people did. And some
Was
people
it?
never figure it out. But let's go back to the journey of it because we can speak philosophically about purpose, but tell it, this you have to really take your purpose really is grounded in where your upbringing, okay? Could you take us back to, little Kareem here in Queens? I mean, what was that all about? What did it look like?
Yeah, I mean, God makes no mistakes. So I was born in Queens, New York. Both of my parents were immigrants. They immigrated from Egypt. My father passed away when I was a lot younger, one of seven. And by
How
virtue
old were
of
you
just
when
like,
your father passed?
I was 15. I was 13 when he got diagnosed with terminal lymphoma. And so I'd say like early teens. My youngest brother at the time was one when he passed away. So just imagine seven of us from my oldest brother's a year older than I am, 16 to one. Uh, Lived in a 2-bedroom apartment, like moved around a lot when we were kids and we were younger, just like dodging rent.
What were
And
you thinking? What was it like when your dad passed at that time at 15 years old to have, well, you had 2 years with him before he died, right? So there was this preparation time, but how did that, you're pretty thoughtful. How did that impact you at the
um,
time?
I feel like it changed my life and perspective, and I just think it happened out of necessity. So it's surreal. But my father went through like chemotherapy and radiation, and so he looked like he aged 20 or 30 years over the course of that year. So when his time came, he didn't look like he wasn't ready to pass. Like it looked like it was there. It wasn't like an abrupt sort of thing, like you were saying. I don't know. I maybe thought that there was a little bit more security, that there was a little bit more safety leading up to that point, and then obviously it all disappears. And now I'm looking for how I'm going to take care of myself. I'm going to take care of my future, what it is I'm going to do, and I turned to education, as like funny as it sounds. So up until that point,
but that gets you into a point though where you're saying that is and this happened to me when my father left. My father left when he died, but I was 27 when he died, and I remember thinking. I had already been in my occupation. I was in my startup. We were making money at the time, so I was getting paid regularly, which was a good thing. I was married. I had no kids. And so I was about your age. I mean, you're 28 now, I think, aren't you?
Yeah, 29. So
29.
You're
okay. And when he died, I remember we were flying back, and it was like, oh, my God, the backstop is gone. It's like I have to stop all the balls that the pitcher's throwing now. There's no – even though
and he was the man of the household.
Yeah, right. Even though he wasn't really set financially. I was making more money. I was fine, but it was like he was always going to be there, and then he wasn't. And at 15, it would be so different. I just talked to another friend of mine, Bailey, who lost his dad, and he's Georgia Tech grad. He's probably 33. He's got three kids now, I guess, and and here he is. He lost his dad, and it was the same kind of thing. I think it was the same disease, and but still, it had the same impact as it does on a 15-year-old or a 27-year-old. So it's a tough time.
I think, yeah, the difference is you don't have the same tools to process when you're younger, right? Like you don't. To me, it was like the first significant person in my life to pass away or die. I hadn't lost any friends. I hadn't really lost a lot of people around me that I was that close to. And you're becoming of age, right? You're a teenager, and this is the whole like time to be a man and like man up. And I remember going to his funeral and not shedding a tear, but then like crying like a baby in the nights that like passed after. And I remember being too ashamed of like showing that vulnerability during the day. And so, yeah,
because you don't even know how to mourn properly.
Yeah, right? And you don't know what it means to be a man yet.
Right. Oh boy, that's the big one. It's an interesting thing. The people that I know that have lost their fathers early in age, well, of course, I hang around with entrepreneurs, but most of them became entrepreneurs. And that was true. Also, I think of when you think of some of the more famous entrepreneurs in a lot of cases, that we've known over the years. But so it's not unusual, but it's a terrible transition to go through. So you're growing up there. You're 15. You're the second in line. You're
go through all.
How
these,
did education become what you said? I turned to education.
Well, and I say that because up until that point, I mean, I was starting to disengage. Right when I was in 7th grade, I had 60 absences, so I didn't really go to school. I didn't think school was for me. I didn't think I would grow up and get a college education or college degree. My father dropped out of high school in Egypt. My mom only finished high school in Egypt, and we knew the U.S. was a completely different bar. And so I wasn't like going to school for the sake of like becoming the top of my class or getting an education. I was going to school just to finish, right? And be able to not have people come to our house if I stopped going. So I have that moment now.
Why did you make that decision? Was that true of like all of the kids in the neighborhood? They had the same mindset?
Yeah, it was easy to just hate school, right? It was easy to say learning is difficult or math sucks or I don't want to do homework. And that's what everyone else was sort of doing. And they were allowed to get away with it. So it just made it easier to be a part of the group. No one wants to stick out. So that was my mindset. And then I get to a moment where maybe I just had this deeper understanding.
What does it mean? Does it mean it's cool to be dumb or it's uncool to be smart?
It was uncool to do work.
It was uncool to do work. Wow.
Yeah. So if you could get hundreds and just show up to class without ever studying or doing homework, and you were able to hang out at the park all the time and have fun, and so be it. Go for it. But if it meant you had to do work for it, it wasn't cool, right? It wasn't cool to study.
Why wasn't it cool? What's the underlying?
It meant you couldn't play basketball. It meant you couldn't hang out. It meant you couldn't be on the block with everyone else all the time. Couldn't get into trouble. And that's just
So
sort
you
of
were
what it was.
choosing what was important. You had to choose what was important to everybody else to fit in.
That's just the way it was, right? Otherwise you missed out, and you have this FOMO from an early age. Only realizing that when you get older, that none of that stuff actually really mattered.
So where did you take it from there? So you had 70 absences in seventh grade.
60 in seventh grade. My older brother actually
How many
had
times
70
did you
in
go to
eighth
school
grade.
in seventh grade? I mean, how many did you miss?
Well, I'll tell you this. There was only one full week of school that I went to. And that was the week of my birthday, because my seventh grade teacher said if I came to school for a week straight, they would throw a party on my birthday. So that was the only week I went the whole week. So every other week must have been at least 1 or 2 days where you're missing.
Well, that was the first time that you actually worked for something.
Yeah. The incentive was set up, right?
Exactly right. I love that teacher. She changed your life.
Yeah, I'll never forget that birthday. I'll never forget that experience. So I get to high school. That's when my father passes, and I see a Puerto Rican gentleman named Eddie Rodriguez who basically says he grew up low income in the Bronx. Mother was a seamstress. Father was a seamstress. One of them was a taxi driver, and he went to Columbia undergrad, NYU Law School, and made it out, and was saying from his own experience that education is your only way out. And for better or for worse, I almost had nothing else to believe but that, right? So it wasn't I had a lot of other options.
Yeah, but
so
why
I
didn't
turned
you
to
continue? Why didn't you just continue to believe what you were believing, which is just hang out with the guys, get in trouble, play basketball, just don't
I just
work.
didn't see.
Why did he all of a sudden
he
says something, and all of a sudden you go, yeah, of course.
Yeah, no, call it a perfect storm, right? I entered high school. I was 4'10" my freshman year, 98 pounds maybe. So I wasn't going to go Division I basketball. So that wasn't working in my favor, and I couldn't rap. And so I wasn't going to become a rapper or an entertainer. And so I had one other option, which is to be an entrepreneur or go into business. And so I realized.
Did your friends have that conversation amongst themselves?
I think it was just an unspoken rule that we were all trying to make it to the NBA one day. And that's what we spent a bunch of time playing basketball, or people were rapping or freestyling in the park. And so that was just sort of what you were going to do, right? We didn't have a bunch of engineering or doctor or lawyer role models.
Yeah, but what's interesting though, is you're sitting there and saying, we're not going to be basically unemployed or gangsters. Okay. We do need money. So we have to become a something. And in the neighborhood in low income, you're saying, well, the something is sports or entertainment.
Yeah. And that's it. I mean, that's what that, and you don't really have, so we didn't just grow up poor. We also grew up, and many of us were first generation, right? So immigrants tend to cluster together.
Yeah, right.
And so a lot of our parents stayed home. They just raised kids, or they were taxi drivers, or they worked for sanitation. Or they worked in janitorial services. It wasn't like they were out there doing things that required a college education. And so we kind of just said, we don't want to be them. And everything you see on television is entertainment and sports, and that's where all the money is. Or you can become a doctor, but good luck getting through school and becoming a doctor.
So what was this? You said his name was it Eric Rodriguez?
Eddie Rodriguez.
Eddie Rodriguez. Okay. So he was a peer of yours?
No, he was I would say a mentor and a friend now, but just older gentleman, grew up in the Bronx, was able to relate to him on his story and just took his journey. How was he a part
of your life?
He started an organization called Rewarding Achievement, and it paid kids at 31 struggling New York City public schools to pass advanced placement courses. And so as a part of the program, you would go and get extra tutoring and support from the top AP instructors.
Oh, okay.
He was the one overseeing and managing that operation almost 20 years ago now. And that was how I sort of ran into him. He was sort of a figurehead, and then became a mentor and a friend as I was getting ready.
He was a figurehead in the neighborhood?
No, he ran this organization. So whenever we would go,
how did you meet him?
Through Rewarding Achievement. So
how did you get to Rewarding Achievement?
I was
that
out of high
doesn't
school.
Sound like a place that you were going to go based on what you just said.
No, Well, it was in my high school. It was random, and there's an element of like luck and like God's grace in all of this, right?
Huh.
This billionaire hedge fund manager decides he wants to do something good, and he's going to incentivize kids to pass AP exams. And so they thought that if you paid kids in low income neighborhoods to pass these exams, that they would do better. And it wasn't so much important that they just passed the exams, but that they took the actual classes and the courses, because the rigor of the AP classes would put them on a trajectory to be successful in college. If you know anything about New York City's public school system, you know that there's like 300 struggling high schools. I happened to be at one of the 31 that were picked. And I was on the AP track because they were going to pay us to pass these exams. So my high school was large enough that they just like forced anyone who they thought had any sort of potential into AP classes, whether or not they could compete.
Well, how did you get identified as somebody with potential?
That's a good question. I think I behaved
Never thought of that one, huh?
Well, no, I have, but it's less about how you performed academically or your academic intellect, and more about how you behaved in class. And I hate to say this, but it's the truth. In a lot of your lower income and inner city schools, the kids who get good grades are the ones who behave in class. They're the ones who show up, the ones who don't create any trouble or heartache for the teachers. Like the bar is just so low, right? Like a lot of my friends would cut class. When they were in class, they were disruptive. And so that's what you were competing with. So if you just showed up and had like a pencil and some paper and raised your hand occasionally, you got good grades. And so because I did that, I did those things, I was on the honors of the AP track. Nothing to do with my own intellect or ability. And I remember actually taking an AP European history class the year before this incentive program started. And I was getting 90s and 95s in the class all year long. And then at the end of the year, I got a 1 on the exam. So how do you get 90s and 95s in a class all year, showing that you've mastered the content, and then get a 1 out of 5, showing that you've actually have no mastery? Well, it's because there's a disconnect there between how we grade and the actual like intellect or rigor that you possess at the end of a course.
Okay.
So I was like, I'm not doing this AP stuff, extra work for no reason. And then they said, well, we'll pay you $500 next year if you get a 3, $750 if you get a 4, and $1,000 if you get a 5. I passed 5 AP exams by the time I graduated, and that was part of how I met Eddie.
What was it like to get the first check?
It was.
Do you remember that?
I do actually remember that experience. It's unreal, right? Because I had friends at other high schools who are also taking AP classes, and their schools are low income, and they're not being paid anything. And so it kind of felt like a handout. And I would actually say my second check was a little bit more memorable than my first one.
Okay.
The first one you kind of take and you're like, this is not real, right? Like, oh, this is a joke. The second one, you're like, oh man, this isn't a joke. But is this a handout? Right? Like, or what are the strings? Like now you're skeptical. Like, what is it that I owe this person? Why are they just giving me money? Right? I'm not thinking about the like social dynamic of them trying to empower low income people and the bigger like context behind how you all don't graduate on time.
No, it's all about you. Yeah. You didn't care what it was. Yeah.
You're just like sitting there and you're like, oh my God, this is real. And they're giving this to me and there's no strings attached. There has to be strings attached. And I remember actually going up to Eddie and saying like, thank you so much. Like if there's anything I can do for you, thinking like he was the one who funded these checks, like, please let me know. And like Eddie was like a former corporate lawyer and still is practicing, but like super successful. Like what's a couple $1,000s to him? Like not that big of a deal. And he's like, oh, like, don't worry about it. Just like pay it forward. And I'll always remember those words because in the back of my mind, I sort of said to myself, like one day I'm going to pay it forward so I can pay him back.
Oh, okay. So it actually was meaningful to you what he said.
Yeah, it was. And it transformed my perspective.
I want to kind of step back for just a second. So you said that they recognized you as somebody who had potential, right?
Yeah.
And you gave me reasons. You said, well, I didn't know. I don't know how they knew I had potential, right? So here you are dealing now in Practice Makes Perfect with a lot of younger kids in the same circumstances that you were in, okay?
Mm-hmm.
How do you evaluate when you meet children, okay? What do you look for to say they have the potential? Not everybody has, you have clearly a high IQ, you process well, you do. not everybody has that gift, right? And some do. But how do you look and say, man, this guy, I think there's something here. You might be
Charlie,
wrong, but what do you see?
If they're breathing, like, to me, they have potential. Like, that's my bar, and like that's the kind of expectation we need to have of people.
So
because the second you
never count anybody out.
No, that's just not my mindset. I mean, and you as an investor should know this too, right? Like, people come to you with incredible ideas and they fail on the execution, and others come to you with really bad ideas, but they succeed on the execution. And so, not to evaluate a person's idea, right? And so the same thing, like, you can't evaluate someone's potential at a surface level. It's just not possible. And everyone has the ability and the bandwidth to change and to become better and to be held to a higher standard. So,
but there has to be some sort of like an innate desire, which I think was turned on for you when your father passed away. It's sort of like life became real because it was really up to you now. There wasn't again, that backstop we talked about.
But nothing prevents that desire from being turned on for someone at any moment or any point in their life.
So you'll even catch them before they have desire, try to get them to desire, which is what Eddie did in effect, right? Eddie showed
maybe you just need a role model. Maybe you need a mentor. Maybe you need a different perspective. Okay. Maybe you need to struggle a little bit more, whatever it is. I don't know, right? Like, your starting place doesn't have to dictate your outcome, right? If you looked at every social factor and place about me, there were so many overlapping characteristics between me and so many of my friends. You couldn't tell the differences, right? Maybe I took this AP course or AP class. Remember, there are 30 other kids in all of my classes. So I'm not the only one who's going through this AP prep program. I'm not the only one who met Eddie. I'm not the only one who went through like my high school. So you just don't know. And part of my rationale and thinking is
how many of those people that you went through with Eddie that have been impacted, that were identified by Eddie or Eddie was working with them, didn't complete, didn't just sort of said, this is stupid, I don't need to do this, and they went back to the hood. I mean, how many were you in a minority or were you in a majority?
No, probably 2 or 3 times the number who did make it out or who did go to great schools, and who did get to a point where they feel like they're happy and fulfilled and successful with what they're doing. So yeah, and the inner city is very much, I always talk about it as like being this cylinder, not a cylinder, a funnel.
Yeah.
Where everyone is born at the top and like has an equal chance, but every single year people like just sort of fall out of the funnel somehow, right? Like, think of it as being translucent. And then at the very end, as years progress, very few people just sort of like drip out. And so how do we turn this funnel into a cylinder? And part of like my work and my life,
that's funny that you should say that. We're not hearing that message today. What we're hearing is the message that everybody in the inner city who's part of this, that starts at the top, you said they all have equal opportunity. And what we're hearing today is they have no opportunity. So that's terrible that they're in this funnel.
Yeah, no, there's distractions, there's negative role models, there's all of these things that force people just sort of to fall out or disengage or no longer get there. And a lot of my like original thinking, even with our organization, was how do we take kids who are in the middle, who've somehow figured out how to stick to it and like bring them back so they can help guide or Sherpa other people through that.
Well, why did you get down? Why did you get down? Why you?
I talk about my ability to ask for help, and it's subtle. I had this question when I was getting ready to graduate from another mentor who was like, why you, why this? And then for a very long time, I always used to think it was opportunity, right? I had more opportunities, or I took advantage of the few opportunities that we had. And I know we're talking to a business audience, so what I like to use is this business analogy. Every time someone comes to you with an idea or a business, you evaluate it, but you don't jump on it, right? You don't invest in every single company that comes your way. Same thing for the kids I grew up with, right? They have opportunities, but you don't jump on every single opportunity that comes your way. But the difference is you get fewer opportunities. And so if you don't jump on one of them, like, you eventually won't have the opportunity to get out. And so I always used to think it was that. And then would say,
you always used to think it was that, that you jumped on one of the few opportunities.
I jumped on one of the few opportunities that came my way, right? Like, not every opportunity is a good investment either. Not every opportunity makes the most sense for you. And so if we had more opportunities for folks, eventually they would jump on the right one. And I realized it wasn't that. I mentored other kids who grew up in similar neighborhoods.
So what you said is it's more opportunities is not the answer.
That's not the answer. It could be part of the solution. But I think the difference between myself and others, speaking specifically to that, is that I wasn't ashamed or embarrassed or afraid to ask for help, right? Like when you get to the top of any organization or any, like you get to any realization.
Were you that way? Were you that way? Did you ask for help? Do you remember Karim at 10? Was Karim at 10 someone who asked for help?
I don't remember at 10, but I remember at like 13, I remember at 14, I would go to office hours. I would stay during lunch with like my AP chemistry teacher. I was going to these Saturday programs. When I was stuck on something, I was never embarrassed to raise my hand and say, hey, I don't get this.
Wow. Okay. I think this asking for help. I did interview a guy named Chip Patterson, who wound up parking cars and 30 years later sold his business for probably $50 million, which was a national car parking service. Okay. And here he was, this kid in college, like just like you, he's parking cars. And then this kind of came to him. What I realized with him is his superpower was he wasn't afraid to ask for help. He asked for help like all along. I said, how did you do that? Well, I asked this guy. And how'd you do that? Well, I was parking cars for lawyers. And I'd say, well, how do I do a lease? Oh, you need to go do, it was great. And you're saying you had that same ability. So I think that's so obvious, but very few people do it.
Well, why? The reality is like, it's embarrassing, right? It feels degrading when you ask someone for help. It's not normalized. And no matter what, it's going to be uncomfortable, no matter what phase you're at in your life. And I don't think the percentage of people who ask for help is any higher or lower because of your income class, right? Or your socioeconomic status. It's not like there's more rich people who are born having this innate ability to know how to ask for help. The difference is if you don't learn to ask for help, and if you don't ask for help in your lower income, there's a lot less safety nets.
Yeah,
right?
But my point in this whole ask for help thing is I don't know that it's learned or it's just something that you have in you. I don't know if it's sort of like this quiet confidence that you don't even know you have the confidence because it doesn't bother you to say, hey, look, I don't get it. Other people maybe don't have that innate confidence and they go like, if I raise my hand and they don't think I get it, then they're going to think I'm stupid. So I don't ask. And then it becomes reinforcing, right? This negative behavior.
I think it's like athletic ability, right? There are some people who are born faster, but you can learn to run faster even if you weren't born faster, right? Then you can figure out technique and all these other things.
Yeah.
And I think some people have this innate ability to be able to ask for help, but you can teach it. Like people can learn how to ask for help and be successful with it. If we can normalize the feelings of embarrassment, if we can start to move away the shame that comes with feeling like, oh, well, if I ask this person for help, then they're going to think I'm dumb or I'm going to trouble them and they're busy. They're a really busy person. I don't want to like put something more on their plate or I don't want to owe someone something because I have nothing to give them. So if they give me this for free.
Here's the other side of that thing is, you're an entrepreneur and you went out asking for money and we're going to get into that. Okay. And no one likes to ask other people for money, but if you really need the money and you just have to do it because you look around and there's no one else to do it. So you start doing it, you're going to get that. You're starting a company to do. You want money from me for that? Are you an idiot or something? You're going to get all kinds of no's. Okay, nice no's and horrible no's. And then after a while, you're just saying, "Look, I need money. I got to keep asking for money." And eventually, you get past all that.
Yeah, but not everyone you're going to ask for help is going to want to help you, right?
That's my point.
Yeah, that's okay too, and that's just part of the process. But some people don't have that innate feeling inside to say, okay, this is what it feels like. I need to separate that because they're saying no to this idea or they're saying these values don't align. They're not saying no to me as a person, right? They're not rejecting me as an individual.
And they're not saying because I don't understand, they're not saying I'm stupid.
Yeah.
Right.
But so if you don't ask for help and you're lower income, you're screwed. Here's the difference though. If you don't ask for help and you're wealthy or you're affluent and you go to a really good private school, well, guess what? If your grades are slipping, guidance counselor, teacher, mom, everyone else is going to step in. Like you don't have to ask for help. People are going to know you need help. You're at the bottom of the totem pole.
That is a great insight. That's part of the disadvantage or part of this what do you call it? The achievement gap.
Yeah, part of the opportunity gap there, right? Like that's not even a gap in achievement. It's in opportunities. No one is stepping up to say, hey, you need help, I'm going to help you, because there are so many people who need help. And so who do you prioritize? Well, squeaky wheel gets the oil, right? Or gets the grease. And so you raise your hand and you say, hey, I need help, or I'm willing to accept help. It's a lot easier to direct your energy and attention to, like you were saying earlier, the person with the innate desire than it is to go after the person who doesn't have the innate desire and help them cultivate that.
Yeah. I think that was one of the, I had that insecurity and I didn't ask for help. Okay. And I think it's something that I carried into my adulthood and into my career. And I think that when I look back, I think how it stunted me. Okay. How it stunted me. And I do ask for help, but it's not as frequent as when I look back. I said, boy, I should have asked for help all the way along here. And it would have put me at a whole nother level. If I would have done that. I just missed on that one. I guess it was an insecurity for sure.
Yeah. I mean, and then there's two sides to it too, right? I always thought like bigger picture, right? Going back to what Eddie said with the pay it forward. And I kind of thought, well, if all of these people help me and I'm able to have a bigger profile, bigger organization, bigger whatever, this is going to help me help more people.
Yeah.
And so getting the help wasn't about making myself successful. It was about using me as this like vehicle in the same way I think like God uses me to serve, right? We're all here to serve. How do I use that and become a channel or a funnel for something good and help impact more people? So the more successful I am, the more successful I can help other people become.
So what happened? So now you got all these incentives, and he showed you through incentives how to work harder and how to get good grades. Tell me what happened. So you get through high school.
Get through high school.
You're still one of seven. You're still the second of seven kids in a family with an unwed mother, right?
Yep.
A widowed mother, and no money. I mean, you guys are broke. You're probably living off of
welfare, Social Security.
Yeah, there you go. Okay, so
all the government assistance. This is why, I'm always hesitant to cut government assistance, right? Because there are kids who grow up in these situations that they have no control over, right? And without some of that, sometimes you're skipping meals or you're not able to live where you're living. Yeah. Now, doesn't mean that it's free from manipulation and people who are doing the wrong things with it, but is the good for the few outweighing all the villains out there? I don't know, but different conversation and topic.
So get out of high school. Tell me about high school.
Now it's college. So my older brother and I graduated high school the same year. So he was a year older than me, started school a year ahead of me, but on track to graduating on the same time. I applied to 2 colleges, MIT because I saw it on Goodwill Hunting, and then Baruch because it was the local business school. And I knew I was going to go and become a business person at that point. I don't know what that meant.
Did you have really good grades coming out of high school?
Yeah, at that point, I finished 5th in my class.
Out of how many? Was it 350 or something?
So there were 1,440 students in my freshman class, and there were 526 in my graduating class. So only about 55% of the kids were graduating.
So you were top 1%.
Yeah, at that point, top 1%. But top 1% from an inner city high school, which to some people doesn't mean much because your grades are inflated, right?
Did it mean anything to MIT?
No, because I didn't get in.
What did you do in your SATs? Do you remember?
1770 out of 2,400 or a 1230 out of 1,600.
Okay, got it. Okay.
So put me in the 95th percentile in terms of SAT score in my high school, but in the 70th percentile nationwide. When colleges were looking, they're looking at how you do compared to everyone else, not how you did compared to everyone who had the same resources as you did. Right.
Well,
so
how come you considered yourself when you were doing the applications? I think you would check the box African American, wouldn't you?
Yeah, I did.
Okay, so how come that didn't help you? Give you that extra 200 points, if you will, to get you to wherever.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't realize this until I was supporting someone else through the process. But there are so many things that have to go right for you to get into a top institution. Right? You need good grades, great SAT score. You need a compelling personal statement. And then you need great letters of support. So now imagine the few teachers in your high school being asked by 500 students to write a letter of recommendation. You're not going to give them the flowery, elaborate, heartfelt recommendation that kids at these private schools are
to
getting.
whom it may concern, good kid.
He's a great student. Yeah. So now on the admissions committee side, what do? Do you versus like another letter that you got from a student who goes to school where they're assigned people who are going to write their letters of recommendation and they only have 10 students that they have to do it for. That's a big part of your application. And so, yeah, I don't.
So
I didn't have a
so who were you in Good Will Hunting?
Robin Williams, I was the janitor who learned to play, was a mathematical genius at that night.
That's who you were.
That's who I related to. And I was like,
okay,
man,
good. That's what I'm wondering. I'm wondering if you later related to his bricklayer best friend,
No, it was him. I was like, oh, I'm going to be him. And that was the inspiration there.
So when you got the rejection, what happened?
I used it as fuel to like continue to move forward. It wasn't meant to be. And I was like, I'm going to prove MIT wrong one day. And I don't know what that looks like or what it means, but it is what it is.
Or if they care, right?
If they care. Yeah, they didn't care. But the SATs are supposed to be indicative of how you're going to do your first year of college, right? Yeah. And there's a pretty high correlation there. My first year of college at Baruch, first semester got a 4.0. And then
I have never heard anybody say what you just said. I didn't know that because I did horribly in my SATs coming out of really good school in New York City, but did horribly in the SATs. In fact, I got accused by the guidance counselor that I was inebriated or something. There could be no way that my grades would be that I can get SAT scores with the grades that I had in high school. What, were you high? I remember him saying that to me. I'm like, no, man, I wasn't high.
Well, it's a skill, right? Like taking these tests, these standardized tests.
It is. But I never heard anybody say that the SAT score is really supposed to indicate how well you do in your first year in school. I never heard anybody say that. And it was true for me. It certainly was true for me. I really struggled that first year.
So there are very few outliers, but they're there, right? Statistics. Statistically speaking, there's a pretty high correlation. I don't know if it was 60 or 70%. Okay. But like the better you did on your SATs, the better you were going to do your first year of college. Years 2, 3, and 4, the correlation is almost non-existent. But that first year mattered. And for me, it didn't. Like I was an outlier, right? Got a low SAT score. Got a 4.0 my first semester, finished with a 3.96 that first year before I reached out to Eddie. And Eddie was like, hey, you should transfer. You undermatched.
Why did you reach out to Eddie?
I was asking him for internships and asking him for like advice and perspective. And he was like, hey, I think you undermatched when you were applying to colleges. I didn't know what that meant at the time. But
you called it undermatched?
Undermatched, yeah.
Okay.
I only applied to 2 schools, right? MIT and Baruch when I was graduating. So, not to apply to 2 colleges when you're graduating. Now you need to apply to 10 or 15, have your safety schools, have your reach schools. And for me, it was MIT or I'm going to go to the local business school, which is the safety net.
And the reason, it's funny that you applied to college that way. My mother never graduated from high school and my father graduated from high school. They didn't understand college. That's the other thing that, when you come from a more wealthy family, right? They're college graduates. The expectation is just there. The achievement levels are just there. I didn't have any of that. My father expected me to be a blue collar worker. That was all I was going to be. Wanted my sister to be a secretary. Mm-hmm. And then, when I applied for colleges, I said, well, I'm interested in cars. So somebody said, well, you should go to General Motors Institute. I said, wow, what's that?
Yeah.
And that's how I applied for things. I had no idea what I was doing.
Yeah. Wes Moore, actually, been fortunate to have him as a friend, says that we're not products of our environments, we're products of our expectations. Right. And it's not so much like where we grow up as much as it is like what people expect from us. And so.
Which is where you grow up, though.
That shapes, right? Like a large part of your expectation of what people expect from you. But if we change the expectation and we change the expectation narrative around where people grew up, I think we'd have very different outcomes as well.
Yeah, but it has to be somebody like Eddie from the outside that changes that expectation.
Why can't the people inside change their expectations? Why can't the teachers who we go to school with expect more, expect different? Why is this like mindset so permeate? Like, hey, my guidance counselor said I should go to, our college advisor said I should go to SUNY Albany because that's where she went. Like that was the bar. That's where we started.
Yeah.
We didn't start at Harvard or Yale or Columbia or MIT. And maybe she was afraid to get rejected or didn't know what that would do to me. But that's where we started. We started at SUNY
Well, I'm sure
Albany.
probably a part of it is that people like us don't go to places like that, right?
Yes. And
right?
so
There's this underlying
actually,
assumption that there's a lid on your expectations to start with, because that's how we operate. You know, we all think that way, right? I mean, that's groupthink is what is around everywhere you go.
yeah.
You know, if you're working at a big company and everybody's working at a big company, you say, look, I'm thinking about being an entrepreneur. That's really hard to do, because you got everybody saying, what are you doing? You got a good paycheck, you know, you got a good bonus, you got a 501k, there's matching, there's all that. What do you mean leaving? And you go, oh yeah, you're right. Well, because everybody you know is thinking that way.
Yeah.
So how do you, as a little Karim, you can't just sit in the middle of all that and go, oh, I can just change my expectation.
No, and it's the small steps.
I think it takes us outside influences, but you're telling me that that's not true.
I think that's a big part of it, right?
Okay.
These like outside influences saying, oh, you can do this, you can do that. Having people believe in you, having people see something in you, having people, even if that expectation is I don't want to say it's
unwarranted.
Unwarranted. There you go. Yeah. Like even if it's unwarranted, it's there. Someone imposes that on you, right? If people are coming around you and you're a kid and they say, oh, you're hardworking. Oh, you have a lot of potential. Oh, we expect great things from you. That's very different than like being around someone who you're saying like, oh, just have a good life. Like make sure you're happy or get it done. Like you can do this. Like the talk that they surround you with changes your perspective and your mindset about what you believe is possible and what you think you're capable of.
See, but there has to be that when you're in the midst of something like that, there has to be this moment, okay, when you gain this confidence or this realization, if you will, I can do this. I can do this, right? You know, like I don't have to suck at school. You know, I could really do this, right?
Yeah, and I get rejected from MIT.
And when you get to that, though, it changes the now you do have an expectation. But for somebody to say, hey, man, you should have high expectations. And you're like, yeah, right.
Well, and you know, the process of like rejection also like pushes you back. And you have that fear sometimes like, oh, was I overly confident? Did I do this in the right way? And so MIT was that setback for me. Like, oh, I can't apply to another top school. Like, I'm just going to get rejected again, or I don't belong there, or those people are smarter than me. It's like when you're an entrepreneur, you go out there, you get your first check and you're like, this is great. And then you hire your first person and you fail, or you miss payroll, or you lose a big account. And you're like, oh man, I never should have done this in the first place. And you start having that negative self-talk until you see someone else who says, man, I've lost six big accounts when I started out.
How did you miss out on the alcohol, drugs, criminal element, all that? Oh, you were surrounded by all that stuff.
Yeah, and I can't say I didn't participate.
What?
I can't say I didn't participate as a kid.
Yeah, right. Okay, I'm with you.
So, yeah.
Everybody dips their toe into it, but you know, some people jump in, you know, feet first up to their neck, right?
Well, I wanted to be an athlete. Like I thought I was going to play football or basketball. And so that helped, right? And like those things were anti-athletic, like drinking alcohol or smoking, whatever it was. Like that wasn't going to help you as an athlete. Right. But I shoplifted as a kid. I remember there was a time where I went into Modell's and like robbed like $500 worth of like sporting equipment. Just to like give stuff out to my football team friends, like visors and like back plates. And so I had my share of mischief. And I always like think back to like one of the biggest differences between me and some of the kids I also grew up with was that the one time I got arrested when I was 17, it was a traffic violation and like a slap on the wrist and not a misdemeanor or a felony. Like that's another thing. Like I had friends who were equally as smart who, again, in this funnel, right? Something externally happens and for them it was a felony or it was a misdemeanor. And now, regardless of all the classes we took, all the opportunities they had, it almost doesn't matter. Your life is going to change. And so
you were put in a box and it wasn't a good box by society, right? And it was interesting to me as I look back on my life and I have done some of those things that you're talking about, okay? And I wonder, I just look and I say that it's almost like there's some sort of a plan, or it's how did,
God,
I mean, how did I not
don't-
get caught? If I would have gotten caught, it really would have changed everything. I would have gotten kicked out of school. I would have gone to a public high school. I probably would have been a blue collar worker because that's where all those kids went. And how did I not get caught? How did I get away with that? Because I was brazen in some of the things that I did. It's crazy.
Yeah, and I mean the person whose expectation matters the most at the end of the day is God, and I feel like God had a different expectation for your life, and that and it's like it's the stuff you can't explain, right? When you turn to religion, when you turn to faith, and when you like just believe and you submit.
Yeah,
you say it's not on you to explain that. It's not on you to be able to figure that out. It's on you to do something with it, right? And this
that's
is
where
like
the
God's
gratitude comes in. Is
blessing.
you gotta, if when you ask the question, why me? That's where the gratitude shows up, right?
Mm-hmm.
Why me? Because he didn't do anything different than I did, and look what happened to him. And that's terrible. But why me? So what do I do with that, right? So here you are. Eddie says to you, let's get into, what was the word, the matching word that you?
Undermatched. You said you undermatched.
You undermatched. Okay. And you said, okay, so knowing you said, Eddie, what does that mean? Okay.
Yeah, well, I also coincidentally was working at an aquatic center at the time, and my boss had a friend who was a Cornell alumni, and she would go back and speak at the Black and Biomedical Technical Association conference every February at Cornell. And she was like, "Listen, you've been working hard. Like, take the weekend and go up and visit the campus with her, just to like see at this conference." I'm not interested in becoming a doctor or anything like that, but I said, you know what? I'll take the weekend and go up to this like college town and see what it's like. And that weekend I met students, and the students started talking about their AP scores and how one of them got a 2 on this exam or a 1 on that exam or a 3 on this exam. And so you talk about like this element of like luck and God playing a role again. That like confidence that was broken by MIT is now all of a sudden like rebuilt and reinstated, because I feel like I'm just as smart, if not smarter than these kids. Right. So I actually do belong here. I could belong in this
They
environment.
come from a better neighborhood, but you were just as smart as them.
I got these AP scores, right? These were predictors of how well you understood that content and that subject,
right.
And so I passed AP chemistry and calculus BC and government. And so I took all those AP classes, and I was like, oh, I should apply here. And from there was putting an application together for Cornell, and this time doing it the right way, getting the right letters of recommendation, being a lot more intentional with my personal statement, reaching out, picking the right school, right? Like the hotel school was.
What about the tuition? The tuition in Cornell was a little bit more than Baruch College.
Yeah. Well, I knew if I got in, it'd be free. So
how's that?
They're need-based and need-blind. So a lot of these like higher ed institutions, I'd say like the top 20 colleges and universities, probably even a little bit more now. If your family makes under $50,000 a year, $80,000 a year, and they admit you, they're not going to charge you your tuition. So you may have to do some like work study, and maybe if you get some scholarships, you can offset that. But I knew if I got in, like income qualification wise, I wouldn't really be paying.
Right.
And so
what was the income at the time that you're
maybe like $20,000 a year, if that. Like I don't there were periods
in New
of
York
time
City.
when mom also wasn't working. Yeah, imagine a family of like 7 with the sole breadwinner or the head breadwinner making $20,000 a year.
I can't imagine. I can't even imagine.
Yeah, and rent.
So you
rent
get
alone
in.
is after that. So yeah, I get in, and that was one of those like life-changing moments and experiences. And I almost think and say like my life like restarted at 18. You couldn't pay me $1 million to relive the first 18 years of my life, but I would gladly like go back and relive 18 onwards. Like I would pay someone to live 18 onwards. Like that's just, and I don't have a better word to describe it, but like that's just how magical that experience was for me. Like imagine growing up in an environment where resources are just like limited, and you're constantly surrounded by negativity, or constantly surrounded by like negative self-talk and people who feel like they're, I guess God says like the tongue, like imposes so much on people. And when you're growing up in an environment or in a household where people are used to very little or are surrounded by negativity all the time, like they pass that on to their kids, you know? And so I didn't grow up in a household where my mother was always affirming and saying, you can do this, you got this, you're great, you're exceptional, you're this. Because she grew up in an environment where like you were never enough. You were never adequate enough. You could always be doing more, or you could help with this, or you should be doing that, or you should be supporting with this or supporting with that. And you're like, this is not my job, not my responsibility. And now you're in this oasis where that pressure is no longer there. You have these incredible libraries, you have these incredible professors, you have all of these other students, many of them who grow up in households with resources, and there's abundance around me for the first time.
How did you not go into that environment feeling incredibly compromised? You see, so I walk into this thing. It's sort of like the poor kid walks into the rich area, right? I mean, it's sort of the poor kid goes from the public school, the aquatic center you're working in, to the country club pool, and starts hanging out with those kids. How did you not feel like, oh my God, I don't belong here? I do have a friend who grew up in inner city New York, just like you. He did get into MIT. All right. And we did talk years ago about how he really had difficulty trying to fit in, you know? How do I belong? He didn't fit. And so what happened is he didn't fit in his neighborhood.
And right? You don't fit in at the school.
And then he didn't fit in when he went to the school. It was like, God, it was a tough life. You know, he's an African-American guy, smart, he get all these things, and he still never fit in. And he fought with that for a big part of his adult life.
Yeah, no, and I had moments of that too, right, where you're fighting it. But I guess at the point that I applied, I didn't get in the first time, right? So I didn't get into MIT. And so when I got in the second time, at that point, I was already confident and assured that I belonged, right? Like this university needed to make space for me, right? Like I belonged here. I was just as smart as these kids. And then I continued to just reassure myself by getting better grades than they did, continuing to work harder than they did. And I really—
But socially, you were different. You were not as well equipped as they were.
I wasn't. And I didn't go on all the lavish trips and experiences that they went on. And that was— you know what? I was fine with it. Like I already had so much more than everyone else I grew up with. And it's focusing on the stuff that you have and not on the stuff that you don't. And maybe that's been part of my like mindset since I was a kid, right? I always saw the glasses half full instead of half empty. And so
it's sort of that movie, The Scent of a Woman, with Al Pacino.
I haven't seen it, but yeah.
Well, there's a kid. It's a boarding school, high school, you know, in Massachusetts, kind of a deal, right? And all the rich kids sort of put the poor kid from Portland, Oregon, in a corner, you know, and try to have him take the brunt of the punishment that happened to something that they did, you know, and they all kind of ganged up on him socially, you know, and he had no money or no credibility in that elite place to not be the fall guy, you know.
Yeah.
I mean, so there is that feeling there, and you were in that circumstance.
Yeah,
but it didn't bother you. It seems like you just kind of went by it.
And I feel like I knew how to be cool at that point, right? Like I wasn't going to be the outcast. Like I knew how to go to the parties. Like I knew like who I needed to hang out with. Like I knew I was athletic at that point, so like I needed to just like play basketball, play sports. I knew I had to get good grades, and like that would help me with the group I was around. So I feel like it was a lot easier because I found an institution and a place where my values aligned.
Okay.
And I think, yeah, Cornell's hotel school like just didn't.
Where did you get the gifts? Where do you think you got these gifts of interacting with people so well? I mean, you've got some wonderful social gifts, and you've always had those from the moment I met you.
Yeah, God. Yeah, I've never like intentionally said, oh, let me become more social. Let me become more friendly. It's
just who you are.
Yeah, I guess it's part of my DNA and like my identity. I've always been the kid who was smiling.
One of the things that you do is you relate very well to people because you care about people. You know, you ask questions about them. You're interested in them and all that. And that's something that you just done naturally. And that's why I was so drawn to you when we first got together here in Atlanta.
Yeah. Blessing and a curse, right? Because you carry the weight and the debt and the guilt of like not being able to help all the time, right? And so
I never thought of it that way, but now that I do, you're right. Okay, yeah. You're right. You know, I had a friend of mine who's a sales guy, and he says, you know, he's great with people too, and he says that Do you ever notice at parties you ask people, you meet somebody new and you ask them all about themselves and you have this great conversation, and then they never ask anything about you.
Mm.
And that's the yin and yang of it all, I guess. But you had that. So then you get through Cornell. Was there anything as you were moving through Cornell? What was how did this whole education gap or achievement gap sort of come your way?
Well, when I was applying to transfer, I was like, man, I'm going to need a bunch of money to like make this possible, not realizing just the magnitude of how much financial support I'd be getting from Cornell. And so I was looking for scholarships. One of the
you were looking
scholarships,
for money to live on.
yeah, and like also I knew that I could buy laptops and books and like do all these other things if I got more scholarship money. And I did. I wound up winning over $250,000 in like scholarships. So one of the scholarships I applied for was funded by Coca-Cola and the United Negro College Fund, and they were asking students to come up with a solution for the achievement gap that involved corporate intervention. And they would give $10,000 to the student who came up with the best solution. And so I don't know anything about the achievement gap. I don't know anything about how corporations work, but I wanted $10,000 to go to Cornell. And so I did what any other student in that moment would do, and that was research. So I start learning about the inequality. I start learning about the disparities. I start like really understanding why so many of my friends didn't get out, why so many of my friends didn't matriculate to college. Understanding the household dynamics and just like the intergenerational poverty and the lack of access and the schools we went to. For the first time now, I was being critical of my high school instead of being appreciative of like having all these sports and being in all these AP classes. I was looking at them and saying, wow, the majority of the kids who went to my high school didn't graduate. Like, why is that?
Yeah.
Why don't we have SAT prep in the same way all these other schools had? Why is it that we didn't have advisors who were helping us navigate college? Like, why is it there was one guidance counselor?
So you weren't seeing the achievement. You weren't seeing the achievement gap as something that was out there. It was something that was in here.
It was real. Like the numbers weren't numbers. These were like it wasn't an economist.
I lived it, right? It's not something I read about. I lived it. I didn't even know I was living it.
I was still living it, Charlie. So one of the stats was that first gen and low income students like have a 10% graduation rate over 6 years. So already I'm like sitting there my freshman year of college and I'm being told I have a 10% chance of graduating in 6 years. And so I'm sitting there and I remember thinking,
told you that?
That's what the research says.
Oh,
no one like verbally said it, but you're reading it and you're like,
who has a 10%? Who has a 10% chance of graduating in 6 years?
First generation. It's like, I think it's 11%. First generation college students in the US have an 11% chance of like graduating college in 6 years. Yeah. And that's when I was going through it.
I was somebody who beat the odds.
Yeah. You beat the odds. So wow. I remember I see that stat and I'm like, wow, like I don't want to become a negative statistic. I don't want to become another statistic. I'm naive enough. Like you're going to be a statistic either way. You're either going to be a positive one or a negative one, but I was living it. And I was like, you know what? In that moment too, I want to set the bar so high that other kids growing up just like me know what's possible for them. Right. So I'm going to get really good grades. Like I'm going to graduate in the top of my class. I'm going to go to a great college. Like I'm going to get a great job. Like I'm going to have a positive impact, not just through the work that I'm doing.
Listen to that set of affirmations that you've just recounted.
My own life, you know? Yeah, it was in that moment, like I was going to affirm that because I believed that there was a bigger reason for it. And I wanted kids growing up just like me to see more positive role models and have more stories of success and influence because I knew that would make a big difference for them. So
wait a second. So how did you take it from me and my 10% chance to graduate in 6 years to I wanted more kids to have this opportunity? That's a leap. Okay. That's a big leap. And you just like did it in a sentence like, oh yeah, everybody does this. Not everybody does this.
I was going to pay it forward to pay Eddie back, right?
Oh, so back to Eddie. Okay.
Back to Eddie, paying it forward to pay it back. There's the like innate desire of myself to always like want to like help or understand and know. And at this point now I've been armed with this information and I have to do something about it. I don't know. I'm not one of those people who just takes things in and sits there. I take it in and I always think, well, what could I do about this? How could I help here? How could I solve this problem? Like math was my like stronger suit. And so you're always like problem solving when you're an analytical thinker. And so I'm sitting there now and I'm like, how could I do something to help my own community? I didn't win the scholarship. I came up with a radical idea, and time didn't make sense. But the numbers,
Does it make
like I
sense
said,
today, your radical idea that you had back then?
I think with the right safeguards, it could have. So my thinking was a lot of education is trickle down. If your parents are educated, like the odds of you growing up and being educated are significant, like super high, right? The odds are if your parents went to college, you're going to go to college.
Okay.
Not the latter. And so I said, well, if we educated the parents on the fundamental stuff, like the 3rd through 5th grade or 3rd through 8th grade stuff, then their kids would be more likely to be educated because they'll see their parents wanting to learn. And I remember talking to my advisor, and he's like, well, how are you going to force these parents to do this stuff? And I was like, well, there's already so many incentives because we were in the midst of a recession at that time, 2008, 2009. He's like, the government's not going to put more incentives here. I was like, well, there's already an incentive because they're receiving government assistance, Section 8, food stamps, welfare, whatever, Social Security. Why not just like manipulate their incentives a little bit? So send them these like hooked on phonics type programs. And if they do poorly on them, you shock their aid a little bit. And if they do good on them, then you give them a little bit more because it'll show their kids that education and learning is important. And that was the whole like mindset behind it. Horrible idea.
Clearly what it shows is that, your ignorance as far as the government system goes, right? And how difficult it is to kind of change those things, right?
Well, and I was even just like talking to one of my friend's parents a couple of years later, and I was like, oh, what would have happened if we did this? He's like, if you took $50 out of my like welfare, like you're not taking $50 out of my pocket. You're taking $50 of food out of Kadim's mouth. Kadim was my friend, right? So I'm sitting there and I'm like, oh, yeah, that's not a good idea, right? Like kids don't get the money directly. So
Coca-Cola didn't think it was a good idea either. You didn't get the $10,000 scholarship. Yet you're convicted now because you understand the achievement gap issue real time.
And I have to do something about it. And this problem has been around for decades. It's not new. And why is it the progress has been so slow? And then you look at the people who are trying to create change, and a lot of the change is coming from a sympathetic perspective, right? Where people are recognizing this is a problem and they want to help because they feel bad instead of wanting to help because they have lived through it or they've gone through it or they have the shared perspective. And so
one of the things that you say in your book, one of the things that you say in your book is you talk about the achievement gap, and then you show the impact it has on GDP, right? Yep. So speak to that for just a second, and then I have a question to that, but you have to educate the audience here.
Yeah, they say just the difference in academic achievement, right? The achievement gap between poor kids and rich kids and black kids and white kids. If we could close those racial and economic achievement gaps, we'd essentially be closing a $300 to $500 billion gap in GDP every single year. And it's because it's going to lead to less crime, more economic opportunities, right? If every single kid who grew up in poverty, like wound up getting a successful job when they graduated, like they'd be paying taxes and contributing instead of taking, right? Mm-hmm. And now becoming the next generation of welfare or Section 8 or food stamps. And same thing, not just poor, but if every black child grew up and was able to have a successful life and future in the same way every white, or at the same rate all of your white kids do, because not every single white kid grows up rich. Not every single white kid gets a meaningful job. But it's if we could just close that disparity. So if we said, oh, all white kids or all rich kids graduated at 50 or 60% and had successful jobs. If we could do the same for poor kids and for black kids, instead of the 5 or 10% or whatever the statistics are now, that's the GDP savings. And they say that that's the economic equivalent of a permanent national recession, right? So $300 to $500 billion. So you talk about recessions.
Not anymore. Now that we're pumping trillions into the
now that we're pumping trillions.
But what was interesting about that when you pose that argument and then you try to sort of raise money around it, okay, or get people interested in that, is the feeling that I got having been somebody who's raised money for the poor. Working that Uganda and all that. One of the things that really hit me is when we speak in these sort of these economic terms, these macroeconomic terms, they're dispassionate terms. When you talk about Karim, in Queens, who's been incented to do well in his AP exams and him working away, that resonates with people. So
it's psychology.
What?
Psychology, right? It's why we care more about the one person who was killed when they tell their story on the news than when they say 1,000 people died in a crash or a burning building or whatever.
Yeah. But when did you learn that? Because here you are, you're talking this GDP and this is the equivalent of a recession is $300 billion. And people are like, right? I mean, I get it. Okay, that's terrible. That's just terrible.
Yeah. Well, I was still there, right? Like I was the one front and center saying it. And so I think they took it as like, okay, great. Like we still want to support Karim. And I didn't realize that. I didn't know that throughout it, right? Like we're going to help Karim do this. And I mentioned that in the book a little
Karim?
bit. Help create economic opportunities, help narrow this achievement gap for kids in his neighborhood because we care about Karim and his mission.
Okay.
And it took me a while to realize that that's what people were supporting, right? They were supporting me doing this work and not necessarily like the actual communities and the work itself.
That's pretty cool. That's a real aha because it's true though. It's the first thing that we do is like you said, these being an underprivileged, if you will, but yet someone who has high expectations and real potential, it shows, and you're asking for help. People are going to help you.
Yeah,
this is important to him. I mean, look at this kid's on fire for this stuff. What the hell? Give him something, right?
Yeah, exactly. Let's chip in. Let's help him out. Let's help him do that. And it's part of the reason too. When I was thinking about the work that we were doing, like why I used it. And I said, you know what? If that's the reason, if that's what's going to compel you to do this, I'm 100% okay with it. And part of why I say that the work I do is one part of my identity, but like who I am and the things I achieve as an individual is another part of my identity. It is equally as important because I'm trying to create a pathway and another role model or an example for other kids growing up.
How did this all? So this was the beginnings of Practice Makes Perfect, right?
Yeah.
How do you go from this? I can't let loose of this. I need to help these people, right? There's two things I have. Is one is how does this go back to your book again? Talking about you go through steps in here of establishing your purpose.
Mm-hmm.
Can you address that? And then the next thing I'm interested in knowing is how do you take it from there to creating something? You see?
Yeah. And
one's a conviction and one is like changes your heart and the other one moves your feet. Right?
No, exactly.
So go to the change your heart first and talk about your book and purpose and how you sort of looking back on it, how you summarize these steps for people.
So when you grow up poor, you want to be rich. So I'm not thinking, I'm going to go and like do this full time. But now at Cornell, I get into I'm become a fellow in another like nonprofit organization for first generation college students called New York Needs You or America Needs You. So I get more mentorship, more coaching, more support. Now I'm at Cornell. I've learned about these disparities and I get an internship lined up at Goldman Sachs my second year in college. And I don't know, I guess at that point, maybe it's a false sense of confidence. Maybe it's hubris at that age, but I feel like I'm pretty set. Like I'm going to be okay. I'm not worried about me anymore. Like I want to do more for my community. I want to help other people who didn't get to where I'm at. And I create Practice Makes Perfect as a way to pay it forward and give back. And then, like maybe one day it'll grow, maybe one day it'll be something else, but that's where I start. And I say, okay, I'm going to tackle the problems that I know. So I'm doing something about it. And I'm not going to take for granted the amount of wealth and resources and opportunities I have around me at Cornell. And so I start then looking for people who want to do this work with me. And so I share with people my idea, my vision for it, corral a couple of friends to do it. And I tell them, like, if nothing else, like everyone talks about college and how it's not about what you learn there. It's more about the relationships you build and the friendships you have after. And so I sell them on this idea that if nothing else, like if this doesn't work, we'll at least like strengthen our friendships and we'll have something that we can say that we like built together or started together. And so that's the beginning of it. I do my internships at Goldman Sachs and the following summer at BlackRock while continuing to do this on the side. And then I get to a moment when I'm graduating my senior year where I have to decide, am I going to take a full-time job at BlackRock or am I going to continue to do this work full-time or am I going to do it part-time? And
well, it's easy. I mean, your principle was when you're poor, you want to be rich.
Yeah, but at that point it got complicated, right? Because I'd now been around people who had money for a few years, right? Whereas prior to that, I hadn't been around
And
people
real
who
money.
had money and real money at that.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I don't know, a lot of the things you thought about money just weren't true anymore. So as a kid, you think that money is going to bring you happiness. Like money is going to allow you to have impact and create change and is going to do all these things. It's going to solve all these ailments that when you're growing up poor, you think exist. Right. And then you see people who have it and they're still struggling with those same ailments, the depression, whether or not they're the fulfillment in their life, finding meaning and purpose when they wake up every single day, enjoying their work, enjoying their families, enjoying the situations they're in. And I realized that those two things are not, there's no relationship there.
How did you at such a young age have those eyes to see? Because how many other people came out of Cornell or came out of, Penn or name the place, okay? They were in the same environments, and what they did is they signed up to be those same people, okay, in 10 to 15 years, making the same amount of money.
Well, they didn't see the other side, right?
Okay.
So there was nothing for them to see. Like this was normal. Like what they did was what they knew. And remember, also when you're growing up poor, you're not sitting there like commiserating over what you don't have because you don't know what you don't know, right? When you're a kid, you're not thinking about how deprived your school is. I wasn't angry when I was in high school that things weren't fair. It wasn't until I got to college and learned that things actually weren't fair that I became upset and frustrated by it, right? And there's an incredible podcast where they take kids at this school in the South Bronx and they take them up to Horace Mann, which is one of the elite private schools, to go and like view the campus. And the teacher thinks it's going to be a great thing for these kids.
Oh my God. And it pisses them all off, right?
Exactly. What the hell? Like, why is it that these kids get to go to this school? And like, this is the school that we're going to, why, like who decided this? How much of this is just so unfair? Like it just happened to be who you were born to and where you're growing up that dictated whether or not you got to go to this incredible campus experience your whole education, or you went to like a building every single day and like where they were the teacher and other kids maybe didn't want to be there the whole time. So I had a different set of eyes. Like I had a different perspective. I grew up in an environment where there was nothing, and then you go to a space where there's everything. And so you're evaluating things differently. And you think when you have nothing that you want everything, because that's all you know, right? Like you know that you don't have everything now and you just want that. And in that wanting, you're saying, I want happiness, I want fulfillment, I want the ability to buy whatever I want, I want to be able to say yes to everything. And then you get there, or you see other people who are in that position now, like they're real people, right? When you're a kid and you see people on TV or you think they're rich or whatever, you treat them different. There's a power dynamic. You meet a billionaire for the first time and you're like, oh my God, like, what do you mean? Like he's a billionaire, like obviously he's different level status. And you start to realize like, no, all these people are people. Everyone puts their pants on in the same way, just another person. They are really smart, or they've been really hardworking, or they've had a lot of good fortune. But they're still a person.
We all do that too. You're right about that. I mean, look at the way that I kind of grew up. My peer in mind, that's the billionaire and the richest, one of the richest men, if not the richest man in the world, was Bill Gates. And I always looked at that and I said, what a wonderful life he must have. Look at his great house, and look at he has his wife, and he has kids, and he has this beautiful foundation. He plays cards with Warren Buffett. It's just wonderful. He jets wherever he wants to go, changing people's life. And then you see the little bit of the personal life got exposed in this divorce thing, and you go like, man, same as everybody else,
Yep, exactly.
$1 billion did not make for a happy marriage, right? I mean, how come? What else would it take, right?
So I'm getting ready to graduate now, and I'm like, I don't want that. Like, I don't want to be miserable. I don't want to be sad. It has nothing to do with the money. Like, you can have a lot of money and be really happy and healthy and successful and do all the things you want, or you can have a lot of money and be all of those things and be negative. And same on the other side. You could be poor and be incredibly happy and fulfill and find purpose in what you're doing, or you could be poor and be really miserable and think about all the things you don't have mental health issues and all these other things.
But look at what you're telling me, though, is something that I didn't realize about my life, which is this has been very helpful and insightful, which is what you do for me, I did come from Like my dad, he never made more than $28,000 a year. He was a trainman on the Jersey Central Railroad up there. Okay. And, I did grow up in a neighborhood that was, it was better than your neighborhood. It was all two-family factory houses is what it basically was, so everybody was sort of blue-collar workers. And so I had that to compare back to where I was headed, right? Because I did want to be rich, right? But I think that creates a healthiness in sort of coming to purpose, right? And I didn't realize that before. We're not all equal when it comes to getting to purpose. If we just stay wherever we are, if you stayed being poor, if you stayed being rich, because that's how you kind of grew up, I think that's interesting to have that comparison.
Yeah. And remember at this point, like I've turned on right after I've learned about these disparities in my freshman year of college, I've now turned on that I'm going to work hard. I'm going to work my ass off. I'm going to make sure that like I'm putting in my part, like I'm doing my part. There's no like excuse. I'm going to be accountable for my own success. I'm going to be accountable for my own challenges. I'm going to take responsibility and ownership of my life. And so now it also attracts other people to want to help you, right? When they see someone who's willing to put in the work, who's willing to go the extra mile, especially at that age, you stick out. And so people with resources, people who understand that hustle, people who understand how hard it is, then gravitate and want to help. And so I got a lot of like knowledge and wisdom and support from professors, industry alumni, like people who come back to campus.
What's interesting with that is it's so unusual to find somebody that is passionate, like authentically passionate about something. Okay. I had a friend who was in a Bible study. This guy was in a Bible. He's a younger man than I am by 20 years. And he once was in this Bible study. He was talking about how he's addicted to fishing. Right? Now, this guy is a commercial real estate guy. He's addicted to fishing. And I'm like, what do you mean? He's like on the way home, Kathy got mad at me because I stopped to fish. This is in Atlanta. Okay. I stopped to fish before I went home. Like guys in New York, they go to bars, instead of going home. He had us fish. And so recently I told him, I said, I want you to take me fishing. And he says, well, are you interested in fishing? I said, no, but you are. And I want to know why. I want to be a part of that. And so we go fishing. And he says, he says, let's go the night before. I have a place on the lake, a little condo. And he said, the boat's there and all. We'll put it in the water. We'll be ready. We'll get up 6:30 in the morning. We'll be on the lake. And I'm thinking, so we'll fish for, 4 or 5 hours, 3 hours. I don't know. And so I said, so we're out there. And I said, so when do we fish till? He goes, well, I fish till sundown. I'm like, oh my God, what do I do now? But, I was drawn to him for that very same reason. He was so passionate about it. I felt like I was missing out on something, I wanted to know.
Well, and that's how I think you walk into your purpose. It starts with that passion. Yeah. Right. You start to realize like what's gravitating me towards this. And then you start to have those deeper questions. And I lay out a set of questions in the book that like push you to reflect and say, it's passion. I've been doing this long enough now. How do I know if this is my purpose or not? And then if you can start to connect the dots when you look backwards, like Steve Jobs says, you can't connect them looking forward, but you can always connect them looking backwards. Then you start to realize that you're leading or working towards something. And I don't know, I don't believe in coincidences, right?
But one of the things you say in the book that really it was one of your tests for your purpose. And I'm probably not going to be able to find it, and I'm not going to say it exactly right, but you can correct me. It was like, if what you're about to undertake is seemingly impossible, then you found your purpose. It was something like that.
Yeah, I talk about the element of making sure that what you're pursuing is big enough to have other people along with you on your journey. But I don't know about impossible. I do believe though that like what you're chasing and what you're doing is a lifelong pursuit.
Right.
And then there are elements of like, are you the right person to be doing this? Why is this important to other people? And then what is also special about the timing and the urgency of now? And how do you draw those? Like, why?
Here it is.
Why
Here it is. I found it.
Okay.
It says, work to understand why it uniquely happened to you. Another thing you can do is ask yourself, what are the odds? If the odds are little to none, as they were most of the time in my case, then you are well on your way to engaging in work and in life with more intentionality and purpose.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. Why me? Like, why did this happen to me? And if there are multiple instances of that while you're doing your work, you'll start to realize like that there is a bigger reason why you are the one who were supposed to be doing this.
Okay.
So
I like that. What are the odds? So if the odds are completely against you and what you're about to do, and it happened, like what you're adding here, though, is multiple times. It's sort of like this kept showing up.
Mm-hmm.
Then it's like, I guess it's me.
This is it. This is God. Like everyone always says, like, God, give me a sign. Jesus, give me a sign.
Yeah,
and
right.
It's like, hey, look, hey, there's multiple signs here. Are you seeing them? Are you listening? Are you watching? Are you paying attention? Are you reflecting? Are you praying? Like, is that there for you? Because God is subtle, but he's there, he's working. And sometimes you need to open your eyes to like see the blessings that he's putting in your life. And so
and how many people you hear Christians, and it could be Jews because it comes out of the Old Testament that just says, I just need a burning bush. If I had the burning bush, like Moses had the burning bush, then I would know.
Oh, no.
But what never comes up is Moses standing and sees the burning bush, falls on his knees. This is holy ground. And God says to him, I want you. You're my chosen vehicle to free all my people as slaves from Egypt. And he goes, and what's his answer? Oh, well, this must be my purpose. His answer is, you really should choose somebody else. That's his answer. And God says, no, I'm choosing you. He goes, no. There's really better people than me. There's smarter people than me. I don't even speak well. You should find somebody else. And here's God trying to convince him it's his purpose. And I think it's a great metaphor for this is how we go through this, because what you undertook was very hard. And looking from the private equity side, those guys that you worked for, was very crazy.
Yeah,
you could have what we have.
And then I alienated mentors and friends who
you did okay
in the process because they knew my life circumstance and they felt like I couldn't afford to do this.
Yeah,
that this was a silly decision. Like, why would you graduate and do this? And I like in hindsight always explain to people that there are elements of a decision that you can't necessarily articulate, right? Like the human, our vocabulary is limited in our ability to be able to express how we feel about something, right? That gut feeling, that whatever it is, that drive, that emotion that you get when you're thinking or talking about something is not very easy to articulate or explain to someone, especially if they've never experienced that themselves, right? And I love COVID as a perfect example, right? I was on the unfortunate side of getting COVID in late February, but I talked to people who've never gotten it. It's like very hard to explain to someone.
Yeah.
Because it's like, it's a mashup of like symptoms and feelings and all these things that I can't explain it to them. And they
you
can't
get somebody say, you sure you just weren't hungover? I mean,
yeah, like
what was the deal, right?
And it's the same thing when we think about the emotional or the feeling behind our decisions and why we choose or make certain decisions. Like there was no way to explain that to someone who's never experienced that or felt that. They're just never going to get it.
It's interesting too. The one thing that you say is, if you can't get excited about what you're doing, then you can't expect other people to be excited, right? And so
absolutely.
It's interesting with friends who I'll sit with and they'll say, I had breakfast with a guy yesterday and he said, listen to you. We have breakfast every couple of weeks. And he says, listen to you. You're so excited about what you're talking about now versus what you were 2 weeks ago or 2 weeks before that. And I said, wow, I need to take that on, right? I need to think about that. So what am I excited about? What am I talking about now? And what was I talking about then, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I'm talking about BlackRock then, and now I'm talking about practice makes perfect, and I'm two different people.
And your learning curve is different too, right? And whenever I advise kids going to college on like how to pick their majors, I always say, pick the topic that you are going to be excited about, because employers don't care about what you study. They care about how you did while you were there. And you're going to do so much better picking something that you actually enjoy and like something that gives you excitement.
Yeah.
You're just going to go the extra mile without even knowing it. You're going to go the extra mile, and that's going to further your learning and your development in a way that doing something that you think people want you to do or you think other people want you to do that you don't enjoy, it's going to be that thing you dread. You're doing it because you have to.
Yeah.
Your learning is
because somebody told you that was the right thing to do. So I'm doing it, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm working, don't be foolish. You were poor. You want to be rich. You should stay at BlackRock. You're going to make a lot more money. I mean, look, you're making 75 grand now. In 10 years, you're going to be a multimillionaire. Okay. Just keep doing what you're doing. And you're saying like, but this isn't doing it for me. I don't want to be a multimillionaire and have wasted 10 years of my life chasing money to become a multimillionaire and then be unfulfilled, right?
Yeah. And the reality is you're going to work hard either way.
Right.
And they always say the differences between people who burn out and the ones who don't is their work, like does the work they're doing feel like it serves a bigger purpose? Does it feel like there's meaning behind it? Right? There's nothing more deflating than spending 30 or 40 hours on something and then your boss taking it and throwing it out and saying, "Oh, we're not going to use this anymore." Nothing more deflating than that, right?
Yeah, but it was funny when I was working in my startup with my partner Richard Brock. This was back in the late 70s through the early 80s. Is what we were doing seemed to be so meaningful. And then we sold out and I went this corporate route for like 9 years. And I came to the conclusion, it was exciting for me at the beginning because I was learning how to be a professional manager. I was learning how to manage large companies and enterprises. And that was cool. But the underlying purpose to it all was just make a lot of money. That was it. And I just couldn't, and people were just chattel. All right. And I couldn't, after a while, I had sold out for it. And then I hated myself for selling out for it. And that's why I eventually had to leave it, and that's what got me onto this new track of this whole angel investing and investing in entrepreneurs and being with them and helping them succeed. All of a sudden, the meaning and fulfillment came back.
And you can work just as hard in both cases.
Oh, I was working hard, I want to tell you.
But in one, you'll burn out, right? If you don't find meaning in your work, you're going to burn out. Versus if you find meaning in the work that you're doing, you can work equally as hard and not burn out.
But the scary part of the burnout side of it is you're investing in you sign up for the same goal everybody else has. Let's say it's the chasing money kind of a deal. And you're giving up for that money. You realize that you're giving up your wife and your kids. You're sacrificing everything because of what you're doing to get there. And it's not even, it's empty at the end. It's sort of chasing that rainbow to see where it ends. And you kind of get there and there's really nothing there but mist, right? Because the sun
you don't believe it. Like, right. You don't believe that the end of it isn't it. Like, remember, adults have existed forever. And so odds are, like, if you as a kid are experiencing something, someone's experienced it before and they tell you what you should and shouldn't do, but that doesn't stop you, right? It's not like adults just came into existence.
That is a classic Karim statement. Adults have been around forever. Okay. I love that. That's one of those boom kind of things. I love that.
If life was that easy, right? If only it was that easy.
Right? Adults have been around forever, so there must have been somebody who walked that path.
Yeah, and we write these books thinking, like, now people don't have to make these mistakes anymore because the knowledge is out there, the wisdom is there. People don't always pick them up, or people do pick them up and they don't always practice them, right? We don't live our lives that way. We live our lives through experience. And so, yes, there's the occasional person who picks up the book that changes his life and changes their habits. But for everyone else, it's experiential. Or they're saying, I'm going to have a different outcome. Not knowing that if you do all of the things that the person told you were doing in the exact sequence that they did them in, you're going to have the same outcome. Um,
it. Yeah,
so
but we do think we're going to be sort of that. We always see ourselves being on the right side of the bell-shaped curve, don't we? I mean,
yeah,
I always think I could beat all the odds, only to find out that when I came to realize that here I am, 68 years old. I came to realize that whatever I was thinking that I thought was so unique, I find that I was right dead center in the bell-shaped curve. Everybody else was thinking the same thing. You know, if I'm afraid to invest in the stock market, if I was bullish on the stock market, if this was a good idea, well, everybody thought the same thing. You know, I'm saying, let's do a different vacation. Let's go to the Caribbean. And I got there and everybody was there, you know.
yeah, same thing. Yep, exactly.
So how did you move now to, we kind of got down a rabbit trail there a little bit. So how did you then take this practice? So you say no to the BlackRock, and then you go to the Practice Makes Perfect and you say, this is it.
Yeah, I mean, by the time I made that decision my senior year of college.
And you lost relationships in making that decision.
Yeah, because people thought they knew what was best for my life. And,
okay. And you cover that in here, that you say, don't listen to the people who tell you what to do. Listen to the people who tell you what they did.
Yeah.
And then apply it to their lives. What a great lesson that is.
So, and I feel like people got emotionally attached, and I get it. They were invested. They wanted to see me be successful, and I recognize it was good intention. But only you know your life, and only you are going to be the one to like live with the consequences of it, right? And when you get to positions of leadership, you always start to realize that when things aren't going so well, you kind of feel alone and like you're by yourself. And when things are going great, everyone is around you there and supporting. And so if you fail 10, 15, 20 years from now, even 5 years from now, you're going to want to know that it was your decision. Like it was your fault. Like you were the one who made that decision to fail, because the person then who failed will be there with you, right? If you fail and you're miserable and you're sad and someone else told you to do it, like they're not going to be there, right? You talk about your friend who's being pressured into taking on the failure or the responsibility of something. It's that same thing. Whereas if you're successful, everyone will be there. So make sure you own the decision. Make sure it's you deciding what it is, because you have to live with the consequences, good or bad. And so nothing is worse than it failing and the person who told you to do it not being there and saying, oh, I didn't tell you to do it that way, or I didn't apply it in that way, right? And so to own that decision. So
yeah, but you're owning a decision.
Like, you're
owning it. But the other part that you do that you didn't say there is it's owning a decision that you've thought through that is important to you. It isn't a decision. Well, I just want to chase money. That's a bad decision because it doesn't have any purpose associated with it, right? If you make the decision that has purpose and you fail, it's okay. You failed doing something that was going to impact people's lives for the better. Mm-hmm. And there's a great promise of fulfillment in that.
Yeah, and I didn't accept the notion that you would do good and be poor the rest of your life, or you would be rich and be miserable. You know, I just didn't accept that notion. Like I guess was coming up in a generation and in college at a time where they're talking about conscious capitalism and they're talking about business as a vehicle for social good and social change. Even when we were a 501c3 nonprofit, I was always operating what we were doing as a business. And I always thought about it from that lens and thinking about how we could use business to do good. Like my hotel management degree in undergrad was essentially a business degree, right? So I learned about management, I learned about HR, I learned about accounting, finance, and so marketing. I learned how to operate and build a business. And so I was just thinking about how do we continue to use business to do good? And I'm making a short-term sacrifice like everyone else would when they're going out there and starting a business or starting a company, except my sacrifice may be a little bit longer, my road may be a little bit more difficult, but I'm going to feel so much more fulfillment and happiness changing, impacting, and influencing people's lives in a way that I'm not going to get that just making money.
Right. Okay. God, I had what you were talking, and I wanted to interrupt you, and I didn't, but I had a really good thought that I really wanted to explore from something from the book. And so how did you then, so you go to this next step, and how did you went from nonprofit, you started as a nonprofit. What was it like making those initial calls? You know, tell me what give me the mission of the business, first of all, so people understand it, what Practice Makes Perfect is about. And then Talk about those initial calls that you made, and here you are, this 20-year-old, 22-year-old, right?
Yeah, no, I mean, our mission is simple. It's to narrow the opportunity gap in education. So nothing.
Okay, so how?
And then we do it by partnering with low-income schools. We're currently in New York City, but we run programming. So before the school day, during the school day, after school hours, really is about thinking about how do we support low-income schools in helping kids reach their full potential academically, with the focus on academics obviously being a big piece of it.
So early on, what was the methodology that you used, or what was the service, if you will, that you offered initially?
Yeah.
And then I know that you pivoted later, which I thought was interesting. I saw in the book is the pivot became less. When you described it, it was far less aspirational than closing the what you call it, the
summer
achievement
learning
gap.
loss.
Yeah, it seemed like, oh yeah, we run summer school programs,
Yeah.
And I went like, oh my God, that doesn't even sound like fun.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like, hey, we're narrowing the achievement gap and the opportunity gap, and we're going to do it by running summer school. And that's how we started, because the research was showing that 2/3 of this achievement gap and opportunity gap and disparity was directly attributed to unequal summer learning opportunities. So I won't go down that rabbit hole of research, but we started with summer. I graduated college. I'm asking people for money. By the time I've graduated, I've had 2 successful summers of like fundraising and being rejected, and knowing how to ask and who to ask and like who to go back to, and then learning the science of how to make a compelling ask and how to actually run at least the beginning of a nonprofit. And then a couple of years in, realize I'm not going to be able to solve the problem at the scope that I want to solve it at in this legal structure as a nonprofit. And from the very beginning,
before we get to that legal structure, tell me this: what was the? People always wonder, is it worthwhile going into incubators? Early stage like that, you're going into an incubator. You with other in yours, it was a nonprofit incubator.
Yeah,
an incubator for nonprofits. Okay, that was also a nonprofit. All right, but
yeah,
so was that?
I mean, if you've never built a business or a company or anything like that, absolutely. So I think it depends.
Did it help
you? Are
you?
A veteran entrepreneur? Yeah, it made a difference for me.
It did.
Having that kind of space, meeting other entrepreneurs, meeting other people who are starting businesses. It was my first like foot into an ecosystem that existed and said, hey, this is how you're going to do this, or this is how we're going to struggle. This is how we're going to learn together collectively and like do these things. So yes, first time, absolutely.
Okay.
Your second or third time starting a business, like, and then it depends. What are you actually going to get from it? Is it industry specific? Is it not? Like there has to be more purpose to it and intentionality there.
That makes a lot of sense. There is one in town here run by a friend of mine who has a venture capital firm called Tech Square Ventures. He has something called Engage that he put together with Georgia Tech and with like 12 or 15 Fortune 100s. And so the CEOs are all of those Fortune 100 companies are all involved in this Engage platform. And so he reaches out to startups and says, would you like to sell to any of these guys? And they're like, whoa, heck yeah. And they're not startups. These are people who are probably Series A level kind of funding people. And they say, of course, yeah, we'll become part of Engage. Because they get walked in to, name it, Delta, Chick-fil-A, name the companies. And he's sitting at the CEO's desk. That's pretty cool. That's a high value add. That's what you're talking about.
Yeah, exactly. Like there's some reason there that goes beyond just like, hey, this is how you build your business plan and do customer discovery and think about it, which is valuable in the beginning. And this is the part where you were saying, and I can empathize with what you were saying in the beginning with the second half of the book just being the nuts and bolts. And like, yeah, you've heard it so many times now, you've been through it so many times that it isn't as high value add to someone who's been around the block a few times. So say the same thing with a lot of these incubators.
Yeah.
Been around the block a couple of times. It becomes just that, like, oh yeah, okay, I get it. I know this is how you're supposed to do it.
But I will put a plug in that if you have not been around the block a few times, this is your first time starting a company. This is one of the best books that I've read on how to get started and how to hire people and how to create the right organization structure. And you've done and you talk about the importance is all around execution. We get caught up in these pitches that we give as entrepreneurs, winning competitions and all that. All of that has nothing to do with building value. It has a lot to do with building non-qualified fans, is what I call them. Okay, I mean, I don't have everything right. I mean, if you're trying to help poor kids and narrow this achievement gap in New York City through the New York City public schools, and you have me in Atlanta being a fan of yours, that does nothing for you. Okay. Yeah. I mean, emotionally, it's a nice thing, Charlie, he threw us a couple of bucks, and he calls me and tells me and punches me in the arm softly and says, "Good job, Karim," but that doesn't get you there. Okay.
Yeah, it's true. Exactly. Then it's the work, it's the execution.
Execution. And you outline that so clearly in the second half. I think you start the second half of the book that way, saying it's all about execution.
And it goes back to what we started with, right? When you were asking me, what is it that you need to see in someone to know whether or not they have potential? And it's like, can they breathe? Like, and do they have that breath? Because that to me is like all you need to be able to change. And same thing with these ideas, right? Like, you need someone who has an idea and then who's going to be willing to execute at some point. Can you help execute, or can you give them the manual or the blueprint to be able to do that? Instead of just writing
that you had that I think is very special is one of the things that I always say is that you have to, the first thing in investigating whether you have an idea that's worthy of a startup, okay, of a real company, is that you have to understand the problem. Mm-hmm. Okay. And the people that are these first-time entrepreneurs, especially at a very young age in many cases, and I guess I've seen this in people in their mid-30s, is they come out of an industry, okay, let's talk about the mid-30s, which is more typical entrepreneur than the 18-year-old entrepreneur, and they have a seminal understanding of the problem that's in the industry. You lived it, like you looked back and you said, achievement gap, that was me. I get it now. I see my life, right? So you understood firsthand the problem in the market. What you didn't understand was who has the problem and will they pay?
Yeah, and how do I bridge my solution to that? But then but going back to that too, right? Like, if you are that passionate about something, like, you will figure it out. If you enjoy something that much, like, you can go out there without understanding the problem in the beginning and like actually figure it out. And that will lead to pivots. Like, no one ever ends up with their initial product, right? Or their initial organization.
Well, talk to the benefits of bootstrapping, okay, being lean versus raising money early on.
Yeah, I mean, thankfully, like, we did the whole nonprofit thing for a while, and then we decided we were going to flip our legal structure and become a public benefit corporation. And the blessing in disguise is that people thought there was no way to scale a service business by 300% in a year. And so everyone I was talking to try and get money to help us with the conversion was like, absolutely not. This is not possible. This doesn't make sense. And we did it. We grew by 300%. We went from serving 300 kids to over 1,000 kids in a single summer.
Really?
So, yeah. And
how many people was in the service business? You went from, when you were serving 300, how many employees did you have, and what did it look like at 1,000?
So remember, we're summer only. So we're driving all of our revenue over the summers too. So we're employing everyone, or I think it was maybe going from 50 to like 250 employees over the course of a summer, between like high school mentors, teachers, college students that we were employing to run the programs. But we figured it out. And so then after that, it became more about business discipline, forecasting accurately, budgeting, managing your expenses in the right way, continuing to do your marketing, and you're like blocking and tackling, and haven't had to raise money since then, right? So it went from this moment of like, oh my God, we need it, to not having to. And now I always look at it, and I don't envy people who raise money. Like, I've seen so many like horror stories, and I have flexibility that people who don't own the majority of their businesses don't have, right? Like, I'm able to give equity internally in a way that I don't feel like other people can, because they've given so much equity to investors. I'm able to make significant decisions about long term.
I saw that in the book when you went to B Corp. One of the things you saw is one of the guys that said, "Yeah, you should be a B Corp," and I'll invest in the business. And you make a comment and you say, oh my God, when we finally got there and I went to him, he wanted like to own a big piece of the business. And I went, this isn't going to work. So that's a pretty harsh learning at a high point of need, right? So how much did what was that initial deal? What did it look like that you basically walked away from?
I don't remember the exact numbers, but it would be 30% of the company when you're starting out. Like it's also
which as an angel investor is not unreasonable given that stage of the company.
Yeah. And
why did that shock you? And what did you do about it?
Because I felt like we had already been doing this for 4 or 5 years. Like we weren't just starting out anymore.
Okay.
Right. Even though it was a new like pivot in our journey. And it was very high risk still. Like looking back, it was still super high risk. But I thought we had years.
But of not to you. That's what was cool.
Yeah, it wasn't to me. To me, it felt like it was a safer investment than it would have been. And it warranted 30%. And so no regrets, obviously. Now,
so what did you do? So you turned him down. And how much money did you need to kind of get the thing out of the ground, get the new B Corp out of the ground?
I figured out how to get our customers to pay us up front, and John Mullins
wrote a book called How did you do that? Oh, that's what you did.
Yeah. So
you said I had my customers invest in us. That's how you put it in the book. But they didn't invest in you. What they did was
I got them to pay for the services up front. So government doesn't pay you until services are rendered. But we all knew operating programs, the operations doesn't start the day the program starts. The operations start months before that, when you're hiring, when you're recruiting, when you're signing the kids up. And so I was able to get them to certify the services that we were using in preparation to pay us before the bulk of the expenses came and we had to pay the folks who are actually operating the programs. So necessity is the mother of innovation.
And how much did you, but how do you do that? Because when you're dealing with somebody like the institutions, government institutions or state-run government institutions like the New York City schools, how do you get them to change their policies to allow you to get paid up front?
I didn't. I changed the way we operated, right? Like now I documented our outreach. I documented when we were hiring. I documented the training, and those counted as services. It's just that folks before hadn't thought to bill for the services that they were delivering that led up to the actual programming. So it was just a different way of thinking. There was nothing shady there. It was just...
It's just the way you presented it, though. And it was really what you were doing. I mean, all this work had to go into getting ready to do the delivery.
Yeah, to run the program. It's just that most people before have been accustomed to billing when their program actually ends.
That makes sense.
And I would always tell principals, 80% of the work happens before the actual start, right? It's not when the teacher shows up on the first day. It's, are the classrooms decorated? Is the teacher trained? Is the curriculum ordered? Are the uniforms there for everyone? All of that stuff happens well before the teacher shows up on day one. And if it doesn't, then you have what we have now for summer school, which is a teacher showing up with nothing, not prepared, and the students are there, and it's not a great experience.
How did you make it through? So where were you when the pandemic hit? What size, the pandemic hit in March of 2020, and that was well past your summer programs, right?
Yeah, at this point, we've been doing school year. I mean, we had 181 employees across 67 schools.
So you were doing training you were teaching during the school year also?
Yeah, at this point, we, in 2018, I think pivoted into also doing school year. So it became a 12-month business instead of a 2-month business.
Okay.
And we had 181 employees across 67 schools, everything in person. And our partners and our customers worked with us, moved everything online. And this year, topped those numbers. We supported 80 schools across the city, all still low income, Title I. And I'm just proud of the team that we have and what we've been able to accomplish.
What did you learn since you made it through that? Did it make you a strong organization? And if so, how? And how did it impact the product or service that you offer?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I think the team, everyone just believes differently. When you win a championship together, it's kind of what it felt like, The team is very different after that. You don't go back to not being a championship caliber team. you start to understand people's skills, their strengths, their perspective, but also just the ability to push through difficult times and be there for one another. I don't know. You can't recreate that. I mean, people talk about going to war together or going to college together. It's like we had a shared experience of living through and succeeding through a pandemic together. And then we added an entire dimension to our business.
That makes for that pulls people together like you can never do any other. It's one thing. I always use the example of the Marines. You ever meet a Marine Corps guy? I always talk about their brothers in Paris Island. It's one of those kind of things. They went through the 12 weeks of hell or whatever it is there, and we made it through. And that's they're going to be brothers for life. It's just the way it is.
Yeah. So we have that close knit feeling, and
that's something that's a competitive advantage that cannot be matched, which is really cool.
Yeah. And I think it'll be there on our side, continuing to propel us forward. And yeah, we had an exceptional year and are continuing to think about how do we support the school system? How do we continue to take what we're doing and move it up to the next level? How do we think about all of the other areas that schools need us?
How long will it be before you get back to, you've been in this pure virtual environment, then you've been in this sort of hybrid environment, right, between virtual and in-class teaching. And do you believe that the world's just the education world's just going to go back to everybody goes to school again?
No, I don't think so. And I actually I'm convinced that we're going to have 3 tracks, right? You're going to have the sect of people who say, I want to be in person, which is what we've always known. A sect of people who are going to say, I want to be online the entire time, which is what we've been experiencing. And you're going to have a sect of people who are going to say, I want something in the middle for my kids, like I want with work. I want to be able to go in sometimes when it's necessary, but I also want to be able to engage from home, the comfort of my own home or from wherever I'm at. And right
it's
now,
based on the couples or single parent lifestyle.
That's
what's going to drive education, is what you're saying.
Absolutely. I mean, that's what's driving the workforce.
But education always dictated to the parents the way it works. You're saying that that's going to change?
Yeah, I think there is a different, I don't know if it's a feeling or something in the air, but I do think people today are starting to regain power. Our democracy is shifting, and I think education is one part of it, but it has to shift like everything else. We talk about digital currency, right, and cryptocurrency. That's a significant shift. That's people saying, I want to create a new monetary thing, this whole Dogecoin, meme or whatever. The fact that it has any value is people saying, if we want to give value to something or ascribe value to it, we will. And I think same thing with the employers, right? Back in the day, if you said, I didn't want to go back to work full time or not be there 5 days a week, well, guess what? You got fired and you lost your job, and there'd be a million other people to take your job. And right now, you saw Google come out and say, we're going to go back to the office 3 days a week, only to walk that back a few weeks later when people said, if we're going to go back to the office 3 days a week without that flexibility, we're going to leave. And they can't afford to do that. And so I think what's happening is we have this larger shift in our society that's bringing the power back to the people. And people are saying, I'm more comfortable working from home, and wait till the teachers do it. And they have been already saying, hey, I don't think it makes sense to be in school 5 days a week. You've clearly shown me that I can do this job from home. I may not be able to do it with the same fidelity, but that's because the tools aren't great. As the tools get better, as more things get built for teaching from home, then I'll be able to have the job and do it just as successfully.
So the individuals, this is a massive, a macro trend in society that the power is moving from the institutions to the people.
Yep.
That's a great observation. That really,
and I don't think most people are keen to it yet or are seeing it, but I saw it happening and then started saying it, and you'll see now, there are families who are hesitant to return back to in person, not because they don't feel safe, but because they're starting to realize this is more comfortable or convenient. And it was the same thing with the workforce. People initially said it was safety, and then when the safety thing was no longer as big of a concern, they said, actually, I'm losing time on the commute, or I'm not as productive, or this doesn't make as much sense. So I think we're going to start to see more and more of that, which is people taking life back and saying, this doesn't make sense, this isn't right, and this is a better way to do it. So
I love that. Yeah. That makes sense. Well, help me with this. One last question. We got I got to give you your day back here. I could talk to you. We could take a break, come back for another 2 hours. I love hanging out with you. But so you've been in this practice makes perfect for a while, and your mission was to narrow the achievement gap for the poor, right? So how do you measure if you're being effective? A lot of times we just wind up doing good work and it's just work, right? We just keep doing, how do you know that you're making progress on your mission?
Yeah, I mean, we have our internal KPIs, what we're looking at, which is the quality of the program that we're running, the programming that we're running, but then also looking at the lives that we've been able to change, like kids going to Cornell now and graduating, kids going to Brown and going to work at BlackRock, that have gone through our programs. And so you talk about full circle experiences, it's that. And also a recognition that this isn't a short-term thing, right? This is a long-term game. Like kids go to school for 12, 14, 16 years of their lives. So this isn't something that's going to change or happen overnight. And I'm comfortable with that, knowing that I'm taking incremental steps by improving the quality of our interventionists, improving training, offering dynamic programming, innovating, and providing things that didn't exist before. So it's a combination.
You've picked up this purpose in life, okay? And these people who you serve. This is year 11 here that you're going into this, and you're only 29 years old. Do you kind of look forward? Do you ever get to a point where you go like, is this going to be it for me? Or, what sort of, like, you look out and you say, well, what about 40? What's going to happen? Because you got to be looking, I know you, and you got to be looking at your next decade. You're married now, which is wonderful. I'm hoping that you and your wife have a plan for children in your life. God's given us the ability to create life, which is only a gift that can come from Him. So how does this next decade look for you vis-a-vis your purpose?
Okay. Yeah, no, I mean, I've taken more and more steps towards like being mindful and trying to be present and in the moment. I think they say the good die young. So sometimes I have those like those thoughts in the back.
Billy
of my
Joel's
mind.
Around the corner from you there.
or people just, or feeling, what I do? I feel an immense sense of gratitude. I feel an immense sense of fulfillment. Like every single day I wake up and I thank God for another day. The day is not promised. And so I've shifted away from that. But one of the things I definitely take solace in is knowing that I own the majority of this company and this business. And I'm in control. Like I'm in the driver's seat for the next 10 years. If, like, God willing, things continue to go as planned, I'm not worried about what am I going to be doing at 40? Because I think I'm going to be doing something in education. I'm going to be doing something good and something meaningful. So
one of the things you wrote in your book I thought was really good, some research that you had, which is, I think it was in 1970, 200,000 nonprofits were started. And what was it?
Small
and
number.
It was 144 of them eventually became $50 million
plus. Yeah.
So is that where you're headed? Is that something, because it does take a long time to create real social impact and high value. It just does. We hear these things about, I'm going to start a company and it's going to be worth $1 billion in 3 years and all. It's really maybe priced at that, but it's not worth that, right? And eventually it all gets reconciled back. So is that where you're headed as you're looking to say, I really want to accomplish this mission. This is massive impact.
Yeah, no, I mean, we talk about the mission a lot, but we didn't speak a lot about the vision. And I'll tell you that the vision is to build an institution that levels the playing field for low-income children. And so I talk about that.
That'll get you past $50 million.
Yeah, we talk about an institution, right? Institutions are valuable, they're stable, and they have recurring patterns of behavior, right? So we're building an organization and a company that is primarily creating value, right? Because if it's not creating value, it doesn't deserve to exist, and definitely not in our communities. Is going to be creating stability, right? In communities that have historically been known to be unstable, right? We want to be that stability there. And then recurring patterns of behavior creates that predictability. So how do we get to a point where we're continuing to allow people to know what to expect from us and at what quality and at what level? So it isn't about what we're doing day to day. It's about this bigger picture of, we're going to build stability. We're going to continue to add value. And we're going to give people something that they can expect and raise the standard for all of our schools, for all of our partners, for all of our partnerships and the work that we're doing.
That's really interesting. One of the things that came out of, when I read this book, I don't remember in the book you addressing vision. Yet what I certainly see is by having a vision, it really gives it speaks to the longevity of the organization and its ultimate impact. Mission doesn't. And that's really cool. You're just amazing. I just love you, Karim. I love your book. I'm going to recommend it to as many people as I can find. I know you're writing another book, and I'm looking forward to that too. I don't know when you find the time with all these employees in the service business.
Hopefully the last one. So,
oh, really? They're painful, are they? Has it gotten you any? Has it accomplished what you wanted it to accomplish?
Yeah, and I've learned a lot, and I continue to learn from it. It's never one-sided. Even when you mentor, right, you get just as much from it. So every time I put a book out there, I'm learning from folks too in the process. So I'm grateful for that continued learning.
Well, you're fabulous. Well, thanks for spending the time with me. I really appreciate it. I'll close this out here, and then I'll end our program. Well, there you have it. That was my friend Karim, and it stuck with me. It was something that he said, and it's just so typical of him. Adults have been around forever. And we started this thing by saying, if you don't know something and you're interested and you don't know, ask people to help you. And that has been a continual idea on what makes people successful that I've seen from all of these entrepreneurs that I've talked to. Ask for help. So thanks for coming. Please sign up at paparelli.com so that you receive my blogs, and you'll also receive these interviews. And thanks for sharing this time with us. Take care.